Today, we are kicking off a new series called Pure Desires. And if you're here for the very first time, you stepped into a hornet's nest because we're talking about sex in July. We always do. Welcome, get excited about it, get uncomfortable, do whatever you got to do, right? But we're going to talk about Pure Desires. This series is rated PG-13, so if there's little ones in here, younger ears, what we talk about over the next few weeks might not be appropriate. But let me just throw out a little thought on this. I think the age of having conversations with children is getting lower and lower and lower because they're being impacted by this stuff at a younger and younger age. So as parents, I just want to challenge you, have the hard conversations early, even though you're like, I don't know, but because it's out there and it's gonna hit them kind of hard. Rated PG-13, we're gonna cover topics that might not be appropriate. And so here's the question: why talk about sex in church? That's a valid question, right? I mean, why do that? I mean, some of you are like, I can't believe they're doing that, you know? But I think there's several reasons. One of them is very obvious, and that is that God created sex. I mean, he created us as sexual beings. And so to not talk about one of the key characteristics of what God created us for things like procreation, to be a reflection in our oneness in sexuality, that's an idea. Here's one: pleasure. I thought I'd get a hoo-hoo from some people there. All right. Come on, don't get so serious. This has got to be, all right. Yeah. A newlywed back there just said, hoo-hoo. Oh, okay. But another reason is, sadly, the church has really buried its head in the sand on this topic. And it's a huge topic that it impacts our society. I mean, I think that's why we should be talking about it, because we have, and I as a church leader stand before you and apologize for that, because we haven't done our best talking about things that we really should be talking about. And we've let other people, other groups, decide or define sexuality for us. The 5th and 6th graders, I mean, right? Come on, junior high students, the education system, instead of us defining it according to God's biblical standards and what he thinks to be true or is true. And then I think another reason is very simply this, and I don't think any of us would doubt this, that our world is desperate for a right perspective on sex. I think we're messed up. Anybody else think we're messed up? I just think we're a hot mess. I think sexually, and it's interesting that it says in history, if you go back and you do some history study, that every great nation actually imploded from within, meaning great empire. And you know where it was the great implosion? Was in their relativative idea about their sexuality and their interaction in relationships. It actually got totally backwards and it ended up killing the country or the empire. So that's kind of an interesting little side thought. But our world's desperate for a right perspective on sex. And in many ways, we've lost our way. We just lost our way. I feel like even now talking to you in a church setting that I'm having to kind of convince people that maybe we need to rethink what we're doing and how we live sexually, which is kind of a weird thought to think of. You would think that we would be in this context, in this setting, and that wouldn't have to be the case, but it is. We've got to rethink some of these things. So I consider some of the stats, and these stats will rock your world. Every 98 seconds, someone is sexually assaulted in the U.S. I was trying to do some math. I was like, over the next 5 minutes, that's so many people. But I mean, in other words, there's people being impacted and affected by this every minute and a half in our country. That because of desires gone awry or we lost our way, all that. Here's another one. And if you do the math, that's over 320,000 people being impacted by things like rape and sexual assault every year. Worldwide, check this out, that sex trafficking of women and children is the fastest growing crime. It's actually superseding, the drugs and all these other things that we normally think is worldwide crime. It's actually becoming the big one, right? A major driving factor is the ongoing growth of the porn industry. So pornography is in a direct relationship to a lot of these pieces. And there's more and more studies that are coming out that are realizing the impact, the negative impact upon society because of pornography. And a lot of people, no, it's just a lot of fun. It's not. There's a lot of danger there. There's a lot of destruction. And so this idea of pornography, here's something that blows me away. 64% of Christian men and 15% of Christian women say that they view porn at least once a month. So it's not something out there. It's actually something right here. That there's a very good likelihood, and I think if we're really honest, that some of us maybe are battling with this kind of stuff right now. Because it's just part of who we are, and we have a hard time acknowledging that, but it's true. 57% of teens reported searching out porn sites at least once a month. 25% of all searches on the internet are porn-related. That's crazy. You start to think about it. Wait a minute, this thing is way, way out of control, and we're in the middle of it and maybe not really aware of it. And more, pornography is having an increasingly negative impact on marriages or healthy relationships. That more and more marriages are reporting the presence of porn as a major catalyst to divorce. Matter of fact, over 50% of divorces right now are citing that pornography was some part of the problem. It's huge. It's just out of control. So porn use increases the marital infidelity rate by more than 300%. In other words, it doesn't make it better, it makes it decidedly worse. Here's a study that says that porn will diminish trust between intimate couples. In other words, what many people think, it's going to make our love life better. It's going to put some sizzle in it. It's not. It's actually going to take the sizzle away. It's going to diminish the trust and diminish the closeness that you were supposed to have. Here's another thing that the study said. It said that it creates a false belief that promiscuity is natural and acceptable. In other words, it creates this idea that, everybody's kind of doing it, it's no big deal. And then, so it's a big issue there as well. Here's another one. It will actually degrade the attraction. This one, I see it ripple into other areas. It will degrade the attraction of being a family and raising children. In other words, it's going to step in and crowd out what I should be about in raising a family and loving my family and being a family and raising kids and wanting them to be healthy and whole and all those kind of things. It actually pushes that out of the way. Crazy stuff. Here's one that kind of is, I've noticed this on TV, but then I was reading the studies and found out compulsive porn users had greater impairments of sexual arousal in intimate relationships. How many are like me? Is like, dude, every time I watch TV, there's like 5 ED commercials. And I'm not going to tell you what ED is. You'll figure that one out on your own. All right? It's like, why are they there? Well, I believe, my theory is that exactly like the statement I just shared, that it's causing such a problem. It's rippling into all other kinds of areas. And so I say all this for us to consider the stats today and realizing that this isn't an over there issue. It's our issue. We have an issue here. We have a problem in this. And a lot of it, and this is why we're doing this series, goes back to our handling or controlling, if you will, or managing our desires. Our desires. In other words, we've allowed desires to get away from us. We've allowed these things. So what's the point? If our sexual desires are not pure and are allowed to go in any direction, at any time, in any way, without any godly guidance, it will bring about our own demise and our own destruction. That's simple. If somehow we can't get a hold of this idea of what it is to have a pure desire and to have a holy desire or a right desire, then we're going to struggle. We're going to struggle. And this applies, by the way, let me just kind of put this covering. It applies to every addiction in our lives. Right? Drug, alcohol, sex, eating, greed. Everything that we can possibly be addicted to, because the desire goes in many different ways. But we're kind of locking in this idea, especially in sexual desires. And so in this series, I want us to consider together how our desires, especially sexual, are affecting us and how we might live with pure desires. And the Bible has a lot to say about desire. Desire, or longing is actually something that God placed within each one of us from the creation. So in other words, it's not, man, I wish I didn't have this desire. I wish I didn't have this ambition. I wish I didn't long for these things. It's interesting because that's the very thing that God put in you that you might experience the fullness of pleasure and intimacy with other people. So it's a good thing that God put in you, but when it goes awry, it becomes a bad thing, okay? And so this idea of desire is there from the beginning. He said, the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good of evil, there was desire in there that made you want to choose one of those things. And so it's part of who we are, right? That's just how we're shaped. And so that's not the problem. That's not the issue. And our desires are actually connected to our free will. In other words, I wish God would just take away my desires. Well, if he did that, then you wouldn't have free will. If you have free will and you have desire, then you now have a chance to choose what type of desires you will fulfill in your journey of life. So there's a clear distinction in Scripture then between what is called maybe good or godly or holy or spiritual desires. Those are what we want to be a part of, and all of us have the capacity for this because God created us with this capacity. And then there's this other side, which is either bad desires or evil desires or impure desires or fleshly desires, depending on how you read the text. So let me throw out a couple texts, all right? Galatians chapter 5. Galatians chapter 5, and so he says, Paul writing, so I say, walk by the Spirit. That's one desire fulfillment, right? Spiritual desire. Walk by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the flesh. And so he said there's this battle that is happening in each one of our lives that is whether or not I'm going to choose the spiritual, good, holy desire side of who I've created to be, or am I going to choose the ungodly, the evil, dark, impure side of who, there's a struggle. And so he's saying, hey, so I say, walk by the Spirit. Choose that. Then Romans chapter 13, and this is our main key text for the whole series. It says, this is all the more urgent for you to know how late it is. This is all the more urgent for you know how late it is. Time is running out. Would you just say that phrase with me? Time is running out. There's a timeline that's happening. There's a time continuum that's taking place called your life and called my life, right? Time is running out. He says, wake up, for our salvation is near now than when we first believed. In other words, we're getting closer and closer to the end of our time, okay? To the end of Christ's return. That's what he's talking about here. He says, the night is almost gone, and the day of salvation will soon be here. So, he gives instruction. So remove your dark deeds like dirty clothes. And put on the shining armor of right living, because we belong to the day. In other words, you're part of something that should be that. You were created for that. You were made for that. You were shaped for that. You've made a commitment, if you have, to Christ to be different and set apart. He's kind of getting into that idea. We must live decent lives for all to see. Let's live in a way that everybody else can say, yeah, that's what it should be, right? That's what it should be. He goes on. He says, don't participate in the darkness of wild parties and drunkenness or in